Welcome to the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the city bar.
Hi, my name is Sara Walsh, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Pyjov. We are members of the New York City Bar Mindfulness and Well-Being in the Law Committee. And our episode today is going to take a deep dive into compassion in the law. I'm an attorney turned intuitive leadership coach. I spent 18 years investigating crimes of fraud and public corruption, the last 9 of which were at the Brooklyn DA's office and the Public Integrity Bureau. Alongside my legal career, I amassed over 550 hours in study and training in yoga, mindfulness, and Eastern philosophy, and became a certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. In 2024, I launched my coaching practice, Epswell Coaching, where I help high-performing individuals leverage their intuition to up-level their leadership effectiveness. I'm joined today by Elizabeth Pyjov. Elizabeth is a lawyer, facilitator, business school faculty, and compassionate culture expert who holds multiple degrees from Harvard, speaks 5 languages, has lived in 7 countries, and studied neuroscience at Stanford Medical School. And through her organization called Lead with Compassion, she has reached over 20,000 people. Elizabeth's goal is to help create a more compassionate legal profession, which leads to a more compassionate world. This work is the greatest privilege of her life. All right, Elizabeth, nice to see you. I can't wait to dive in. As a way of getting started, can you talk a little bit about your background?
Thank you, Sara Walsh. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about compassion in the law. It's such an important topic. Yes, so my background with compassion predates my background with the law. As an undergraduate, I studied literature and the humanities, and my specialty was Latin American, French, and Italian language and literature. And what I saw in literature was an understanding of human suffering and how humans process and move beyond that suffering. So kind of my first love was literature and the arts. And I see all of the arts as a way of processing one's own suffering and showing common humanity, showing kind of what's consistent among all human beings. And that is such a huge part of compassion. Someone who might look very different from you, when you read about their inner world in literature, you realize I've had some of those struggles. I felt loneliness. I felt anger. I've had moments where I didn't know what to do. And then through literature, you see that across people, across cultures. So I love poetry. I love novels. I love film, because I think that is the essential compassion training. I also grew up in 2 different cultures. When I was 6 years old, my parents moved from the former Soviet Union in Moscow to California, to the Silicon Valley. So I got to experience 2 radically different cultures, because I don't think any 2 places are more different than Moscow right after the Soviet Union fell, and like Silicon Valley boom, San Francisco, Palo Alto. And it was very disorienting to see 2 very different approaches to life. And there was a kind of rigidity in one culture and a freedom and an openness in another culture. And I was, as a child, completely shocked by the change. But then I also found it enriching to be in 2 languages and in 2 different mindsets. I think part of compassion is this acceptance and tolerance that there is strength in different ways of being, and there is strength in different ways of living, and there are different ways to be. So part of my background with compassion is that I found it very enriching to be between 2 cultures, and I kept adding cultures. So as a 16-year-old, I moved to Italy for a year to study the classics, and I lived in an Italian family in kind of Italian countryside. And there were donkeys and horses, and they made everything from scratch, including bread. And it was like it was only an hour outside Rome, but it felt like I was in a very rural place and in a different language. So then kind of that added another layer of a whole different way of being, where at 18, my host family kept trying to marry me off to kind of anyone in the nearby towns. And it was just a very different culture, because I grew up with these kind of Russian intellectuals. And then I was in this very tech-centered space. And then I got to see another way of being. And then I had the opportunity later to live in Latin America and Peru and Argentina, and to work for the UN in Geneva, and to work as a journalist in France. And through that, what I think I really got was compassion training, because I was interested in what's different among cultures, the different languages, the different culture, the different poetry. What I really found was that even when you're in different places, what makes you happy and what brings you support through challenge is compassion. It's kindness to yourself and compassion toward other people that really leads to fulfillment. And I noticed that anywhere I was, no matter what was happening to the government or to the economy or in people's lives personally, if they had a compassionate support system, they could make it, and they could still make it and be in a good mood, even if there were a lot of other challenges. If everything else in their life was going well, but they didn't have a compassion support system, or they didn't have self-compassion, across cultures, across countries, across languages, people did not thrive. So that was my first really introduction of cultures, literature, and I was very interested in the topic. And in my early 20s, I spent 2 years studying self-compassion through the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford Medical School. So I had this experience of working and studying at the medical school before I even entered law school. And through Stanford Medical School, I was certified to teach the science of compassion and compassion meditation. And then I spent 3 years teaching that in New York City. And then I went to law school. So I had this very strong background in compassion as I entered the law. And then once I started seeing what is happening in the law and kind of how interactions occur and how isolated certain lawyers feel, my focus became bringing more compassion into the law.
Wow. What a journey. It sounds like so many experiences and facets of your life have led you to become basically a compassion expert. I'm really curious to know, because as most lawyers are, we love a good definition. So I'm really curious, before we get in a little bit more deeply, what is compassion exactly?
So there's many ways to look at it. That's a great question. Scientifically, the Stanford Center for Compassion found that scientifically, compassion is a non-stress response to suffering. So a compassionate response of caring does not register as stress. So I think this is what's very relevant to the world of law, where there's such an expectation of perfection. And you do come into a lot of situations of suffering, whether it's like a very heated negotiation or in criminal law where you're in suffering very directly. Training compassion response helps you not experience some of the stress. So that's scientifically. And the other part of the science that I think is really cool is that scientifically, when you're giving someone compassion, whether kind attention or playfulness or treating them fairly or just that genuine sweetness, you are giving them better health. So the way compassion translates when you receive compassion is actually better health. So that's kind of some of the science. I define compassion as the intention of long-term well-being for ourselves and others. So let's break down that definition. The intention of long-term well-being for ourselves and others. The compassion is doing something with the intention of increasing well-being or the intention of helping someone thrive. So it's kind of a mind state, and it infuses the action with a different kind of quality. The other really important part is the long term. So compassion isn't like saying yes to everything and just like smiling and being nice all the time. It's the long-term well-being, which means that sometimes compassion might even be like saying a hard truth, or it might be setting a boundary for your own well-being or for someone else. Things in terms of long-term well-being. I think it's possible to do that seem compassionate out of ego or out of kind of wanting to feel good about yourself, and that's not compassion. Or you can do very small things that might not seem compassionate, but you have that intention there. And I think those things have an exponential effect on the world. The other part of the definition that's very interesting is that it's for ourselves and others. Your compassion has to include yourself. So if it doesn't include yourself, that's not compassion, it's incomplete. So this is where compassion is different from like heroism or self-sacrifice, for example, because compassion is this goal to increase overall thriving in the world. Interestingly enough, this matches the root. This matches the root intention behind the law, which is to help human beings find well-being and thriving and how they interact with each other. So kind of compassion is there to reduce suffering. The law is actually there also to help society run smoothly and reduce suffering. What people think of when they think of compassion is like, oh, I couldn't possibly be more compassionate. I don't want to do it at my own expense. But compassion isn't like giving everything up, being miserable, and like moving to Calcutta tomorrow. It's being kind to the people in your life, and it's also taking care of yourself. So think of it's not like I'm me and I want the best car and the best house and I want the most success because I'm me. It's this idea that I want to increase overall compassion in the world. And may we all be happy. May we all be free of suffering. May we all thrive. And I just happen to be the person who's thriving I have the most influence on. So you can't really affect anyone's happiness and thriving as much as your own. So it is compassionate to increase your own thriving, well-being, and happiness. So it's both self and others. The official definition from the Stanford Center of Compassion is that the first step of compassion is awareness of suffering in yourself or in others. Is cognitive. So you have to see it. Sometimes people are so overworked or distracted that they don't actually see it. It's like there's people who can walk around with like a sprained ankle for a week before they notice it and go to a doctor. So we often don't connect to our own emotions. We often don't notice what the people right in front of us are experiencing. So it's being able to be aware of suffering as opposed to like ignoring it or pushing it away or trying to fix it so quickly that we don't even notice what's going on. Trying to do quick fixes. So first is awareness. The second is affective, being emotionally moved by the suffering. Then the third is the desire to see the relief of that suffering. That's where intention comes in. And the fourth is the willingness to help relieve that suffering when possible. So motivation or action. So awareness or mindfulness is the first step. And Sara and I proudly serve on the Mindfulness and Well-Being Committee in the law at City Bar. So it starts with mindfulness. If you look at the etymology of the word compassion, calm, passion, so C-O-M comes from the Latin, which means with, and passion comes from the verb patio or pati passo sum. It's the word to suffer. So it's like actually being with suffering, actually being able to connect with suffering, being able to stay with it, even if part of us doesn't want to see it. And I find that it's even that awareness that can be extremely challenging. We don't want to see suffering when it's present for our kids or our loved ones or our coworkers. And sometimes we just want people to like fulfill a certain role in our life. And it's kind of, I think we can be transactional or objectifying toward other people, even when we don't want to. And we don't want to see their raw emotions or what they're going through. So that's kind of that awareness. The feeling is what arises when you notice the suffering. What compassion guides us to is a way of seeing suffering from a place of centeredness or from a place of inner peace and a desire to help. And then there's the motivation to relieve that suffering and the action. If there's a way to relieve the suffering, there's a willingness to do it, to say something, to do something, whether it's our own suffering or the suffering of others. So I think what's interesting here is that piling on suffering onto a situation or piling on suffering towards your own life, self-sabotage, is the opposite of compassion. And also compassion and self-compassion are the exact same things. And something you didn't ask, which I think we should address, we talked about what compassion is. I think it's really important to talk about what compassion isn't, because that's where a lot of the tension and where a lot of the hesitancy to practice compassion comes from. So we talked about it not being heroism. It's not self-sacrifice. It's also not pity. Pity is often hierarchical. Like pity is, I'm up here and I'm doing well and I'm kind of looking down on you down there and you're obviously not doing well and I'm better than you and I'll have pity on you. But that's not compassion. Compassion has no hierarchy. So what I love about compassion is that it's looking at another person from a place of we are equals. I was born and I will die and I don't know what will happen tomorrow. And I'll have the full range of human emotional experiences and so will you. And there can be no hierarchy between us. So compassion just looks at every human heart. And the other thing compassion is not is kind of empathetic distress. So empathetic distress is if Sara were to come to one of those mindfulness and well-being in the law meetings and she was super, super upset. And I started talking to her and I became super, super upset. And she was experiencing deep distress. And then I started experiencing deep distress. That is not compassion because you're not increasing overall well-being in the world. And if I'm super distressed, I wouldn't be able to be that centered, calm presence for you so that you can become less distressed. I wouldn't be able to be there for you. So compassion starts with this kind of looking at life with a calmness, with a groundedness, with a stability of attention. So it's kind of compassion is being able to see things as they are, but with a kind of tenderness and warmth and responding to the suffering of another with composure, with calm, and without negative or self-referential judgment. But also knowing that today you're distressed, tomorrow I'll be distressed. We all have that response. And there's a concern for it. And there's a kind of knowing that it's common to the human experience, which gives us peace. So it's the opposite of this, like, why me? Why am I distressed? My life needs to be perfect. I didn't sign up for this. And obviously I'm doing something wrong if I'm feeling this emotion. That's not coming from a compassionate place. It's kind of this wish that you be well, that others be well, but also an acknowledgement that throughout life you'll experience every emotion and that's actually okay.
Today's podcast is brought to you by one of the over 150 City Bar committees. If you're a City Bar member and want to become involved with work like this, with creating programming on cutting-edge topics, with shaping public policy, or to build relationships with professionals in your practice area, join a committee today by logging into your City Bar account at nycbar.org and clicking Join a Committee.
Wow. There's so much there, a lot to explore. And I'm really curious to know how compassion and self-compassion play a role in the legal practice.
So I think that a lot of lawyers go into the law because they want to see a more just society. So I think there's a compassion intention to begin with of wanting to reduce corruption or wanting to help kind of improve society and work on the biggest issues in justice. So I found that a lot of lawyers come in with compassion. I find that along the way, lawyers develop a very strong inner critic that is not self-compassionate, and that self-compassion is very difficult for lawyers. My organization is called Self-Compassion for Lawyers because I joke that the only thing lawyers don't have ever is self-compassion. It's very rare that a lawyer has self-compassion. Lawyers often have fantastic colleagues and a great profession and interesting work and the opportunity to live in different places, but not self-compassion. So I think the law could use more compassion in how lawyers interact with each other, in the relationships between junior lawyers and senior lawyers, and also in this training of how to be with suffering with calm and composure, because lawyers do get exposed to a lot of stress and a lot of suffering from the outside. There was actually an interesting study about this, that 5 minutes of anger dampens our immune system for 5 hours, whereas 5 minutes of compassion boosts our immune system for 1 hour. It's one of the first studies from 1995 from Rain Atkinson and Rick McGrady. And I think all lawyers could use better physical and mental health as well, because they tend to burn out and burn themselves to the ground working. So compassion practices is just another way to also boost the immune system.
How do we as lawyers cultivate more compassion and self-compassion?
So I would say the first step is cultivating mindfulness, that calm, grounded stability of attention. To cultivate self-compassion, you can look at the work of Kristen Neff. She's kind of leading in that. I do a lot of self-compassion in the law work with lawyers, from public defenders to law firms to courts and judges, and a lot of compassion work as well with bar associations and legal teams in-house. My favorite resource on compassion, science of compassion, is Paul Gilbert. He's a scientist at the University of Derby in England. Kristen Neff is a professor in Texas, and they have fantastic research, books, practices, meditations. So that's kind of big picture. Small picture, if you want to start practicing compassion, self-compassion, I would say before starting an interaction with a person, just think in your own mind, may you be happy. Like, I care about you as a human being. May you be happy. And just that small intention really shifts the nature of the conversation. Or like a text message pops up on your phone, you're about to reply and think, oh, and may you be happy. Because I think we get really caught up in like people being annoying. Lawyers can get very irritated, and they're often underslept, overworked, and they have a lot of responsibility. So that makes sense. But taking that pause to see another human being fully, I think that actually reduces our stress as lawyers. So either may you be happy, or when you're experiencing suffering, experiencing loneliness, wishing not just may I be free of this, but may we all be free of this. Acknowledging that whatever negative emotion you're feeling, there are so many people in this moment, lawyers and non-lawyers, going through it too. That you are never alone, that there's at least several million people in this moment experiencing burnout or being confused or feeling like I'm not smart enough to do this or feeling like I can't balance my personal life and my work life. There are many people in this moment experiencing it. So sending the wish, may we all be free of this, and understanding that any bit of suffering you experience actually connects you to other people.
I think it's harder to be, as lawyers, do you think it's harder for lawyers to be self-compassionate than compassionate? I think you had touched on this earlier.
I think it's much harder for lawyers to be self-compassionate than compassionate. I think there's something about like the rigor of the LSAT and the bar exam and this expectation of perfection and law school cold calls that really cultivate the inner critic. And then we get to a law firm, which many lawyers go through, even if they don't end up there eventually. And feedback can be given harshly, or you already have such a strong inner critic that you receive the feedback harshly, even if it's not delivered harshly. And there's something about this apprenticeship system where junior lawyers become better lawyers by getting criticism and kind of hearing that this is wrong, this is done wrong by senior lawyers. This way of learning and becoming a lawyer really cultivates the inner critic. So lawyers have the harshest inner voice of any professions I've worked with. And I've worked with doctors and engineers and tech and financial professionals and professors. Lawyers have the harshest inner critic, in my experience. And I think there's something about the way we're trained and how demanding clients are wanting perfection and the hours and billing those hours. And then often, like a client wants something done more quickly or wants a different outcome, and they're going to take that out on the lawyer. And then the lawyer is going to become self-critical. And the legal landscape is always changing. So I've talked to everyone from very junior lawyers to managing partners to lawyers who are the absolute top of their field. But this feeling of like, I don't know what to do, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, I think that happens in lawyers a lot because it's an ever-shifting flow. It's not like you become good at like building a shelf and you're always good at building that shelf, and there's not a lot that switches. With lawyers, you're constantly putting pieces together afresh and you're afraid like, is this going to be wrong? I think that leads to the inner critic. So I think there's a lot uniquely about the law that cultivates the inner critic, and lawyers who are very invested in their career and want to be good lawyers. Then their family members end up being the critics saying, why do you work so much? Don't work so much. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just lawyers have critics everywhere. And whatever voice we hear the most, we tend to internalize, and that becomes our inner voice. So actually, when speaking to someone else, especially a child, notice what tone and what voice you use, because you're not only speaking to them in this moment, you are also building that person's inner voice. So did that answer your question?
Absolutely. And so it sounds like what you're saying is maybe talking to ourselves internally with a voice of self-compassion, the way we might as we'd speak to a child if we're trying to teach them a lesson.
Yes, exactly. So the more you speak to yourself with self-compassion, the more compassionate your inner voice becomes. The more you speak to others non-judgmentally and kindly. This is kind of funny. The thing you hear the most are the words you speak, right? The words you hear the most are words you speak. The way you speak to others actually also builds your inner voice. So being compassionate in your speech to other people builds your inner voice just as much as the way other people talk to you. Using kind, gentle, honest speech to others helps you with your own inner voice as well. Because when you speak, your mind registers it as just a voice that it's listening to and starts to replicate it as well. So if it's hard to think about, oh, how do I stop being critical to myself? Start by being non-judgmental in your speech towards others and more gentle in your speech towards others. And that actually also transfers to less inner critic for yourself.
Do you have any examples of things we might be able to say to ourselves to help rewire our inner critic?
Yeah. So, for example, if a lawyer wanted to go to the gym tomorrow, that lawyer might say, I'm overweight, I look terrible, I've already broken my New Year's resolution, I'm out of shape, let me go to the gym tomorrow. The self-compassionate way to say that would be like if I were modeling this on myself, if I were planning a Pilates class at 6 a.m. tomorrow, I would say, Elizabeth, I know you really want to spread as much compassion and self-compassion in the law as you can, and that it's important to you. And that work takes inner strength and energy and physical strength and mental clarity. As a gift to myself, let me do Pilates tomorrow at 6 a.m. so that I can live by my highest intentions and make a difference and also feel good and be there for myself and my family and the world. As an act of self-compassion, let me do this. So I think one of the biggest switches is doing things as an act of self-compassion. You can take on a hard project and challenge yourself as an act of self-compassion. So self-compassion doesn't mean that you're going to be laying on that couch all day eating chocolate and never getting out of your PJs and watching reruns of your favorite shows. There's like no such thing as being too self-compassionate, because self-compassionate is really living by your highest values, doing what matters to you while being kind to yourself and how you speak to yourself. But it can sometimes mean doing hard things so you can thrive. And we make a lot of choices that might not be comfortable that take discipline so that we can thrive. And that's still self-compassion.
Thank you for using that example. Now it'll be a new script for me to use when I can't drag myself out of bed, but I know I need to go exercise.
Yeah, that as a gift to myself. And then you can start doing tiny things as an act of self-compassion. So what I tell lawyers is, let's create compassion in the law by starting with yourself. Brush your teeth in the morning as an act of self-compassion. Do more things as an act of self-compassion. That will translate to more compassion in the law. And more compassion in the law will change the world entirely, because there is no transaction that happens in the world without a lawyer advising. There's no divorce, no business growing, no real estate transaction. There's really no agreement that happens in the world without a lawyer having some input on it. If lawyers were more compassionate and they could see the bigger picture and wanted to reduce suffering and came from a place of their own well-being and wanting to improve well-being in the world through everything they do, that would impact the whole world so much. Lawyers can get stuck doing one kind of transaction over and over again. And I think that can rabbit hole their thinking. But everything a lawyer does has a huge impact on the world. Lawyers are often advisors, advocates. So I want lawyers to connect that compassion and tension, because it's good for their bodies. Like, it leads to more stable blood pressure. It leads to lower levels of inflammation, greater happiness for them and their families. But that also leads to bringing that intention to the work they do. And that completely changes the world.
Yeah, what a call to action. It's not just some nice concepts that, maybe we'd all be a little bit better if we were a bit more compassionate, but it really has, as you beautifully articulated, the potential to really create change globally.
Exactly. And changes start from the roots. Changes start kind of with not only the huge decisions, that not only with like national politics, they start with those little decisions. And in all those little decisions, lawyers are involved. With the sweeping changes that are across the whole country, lawyers are involved there too. So I would say wherever you are as a lawyer, think about, how can we create the most happiness and thriving and well-being and health for the greatest amount of human beings, for the most people? And then apply that to your work. And then that also applies to how we build a workplace and how you talk to other lawyers and how you treat clients and how you create community and how you are in your family. But I think it also very much can play a role in litigation and transactions and contracts.
Yeah, I was a prosecutor for 9 years, and I'm going through my mind all the times I negotiated plea dispositions and how they might have been different had we been more compassionate as, between negotiations between myself and defense attorneys.
Exactly. And so often lawyers are respected and others model their behavior on what lawyers do. And I'm really glad that lawyers have a very serious code of conduct that we follow. When lawyers treat others with kindness and respect, other people model that. So people model each other's behavior through mirror neurons unconsciously anyway. But I think more so for lawyers because so often they're the judges, they're the prosecutors, they're like the well-respected finance professional, and other people look up to them as authority figures. So I think we have a greater responsibility to model compassion in our interactions.
What's one more thing you might offer as a way of giving advice, or one easy thing that any listener right now might be able to incorporate today?
Yeah, so I think one of the coolest research studies I've seen is from Barbara Fredrickson, a female scientist in North Carolina. She found that as human beings, we're constantly striving for more pleasure. And as stressed out lawyers, we want that like quick pleasure fix often just to rest or to distract us from all the work we're doing. The thrill of many pleasurable experiences fades over time and decreases over time. This is called hedonic adaptation. So for example, if I were to go eat chocolate cake right now, and I love chocolate cake, the first spoonful would taste great. The second would taste great. By the 100th, I'd say, get that stuff away from me. I don't enjoy it at all. Or like with a romantic partner, if you're dating someone, you're like, oh, they're so great. I love being around them. After 3 years, you're like, oh, well, like, he's okay. And like, I'm glad we're together. And he's a great person. And I'm somewhat attracted to him. But it's not that same like rush of pleasure that you get in the first month or in the first year. So hedonic adaptation is one of the tragedies of human existence because any pleasurable experience, you get less pleasure out of it with time. Compassion works differently. Compassion gives lasting pleasure. It's the only kind of, first of all, compassion registers as pleasure in the brain. So that same circuit that lights up when you're like getting a present or next to someone you're attracted to or eating dessert, it also lights up when you're being compassionate, when you're giving compassion or receiving compassion. So in the brain, compassion looks like pleasure. A lot of the intensity of positive emotions decrease over time. How much pleasure we get from compassion actually increases over time. So it's the only kind of pleasure that increases the more you practice it. It's the only kind of positive experience that doesn't fade and that increases. So as you start to practice compassion towards yourself and others, not only do you get a pleasure response and it puts you in a good mood and makes you happier, but you get more pleasure out of it your entire life. So it's something you can pursue and keep practicing. And you can even experience this just through a compassion meditation. And you feel that joy. And it's a joy that no one can take away from you. You don't have to just keep switching. You don't have to keep switching the pleasure source. And I think there's lawyers who go from drugs to alcohol to some other substance, and they just keep switching up the pleasure source because it empties out. You can just be compassionate and you'll get a lot of that pleasure.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you giving us such a rich understanding of what it means to be compassionate to ourselves, compassionate to others, and how that plays within the legal profession.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to speak to you about it. I think it's such an important topic. And I have this vision of lawyers becoming self-compassionate, practicing more compassion. And I know that it is in the power of lawyers to really change the world for the better. So thank you for taking the time to help spread this message.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. And don't miss Building Belonging, a podcast that embraces authentic conversations about DEIB solutions by amplifying the most marginalized voices in the legal industry and exploring spaces others dare not. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen.